service charge? Should you pay it or not? Is it mandatory or not? Those are the questions that are matter of grey area for every person who goes out there to eat. We'll try and answer those questions briefly, but in the latest matter, Delhi High Court has imposed a fine of 1 lakh rupees on Restaurant Association for non-compliance in service charge directions. Now, National Restaurant Association of India, NRAI, and the Federation of Hotel and Restaurant Association of India have been asked to pay costs for non-compliance. Now, what is the non-compliance about? The court had asked association for a comprehensive list of their members who are still imposing service charge mandatorily in the bill, and their willingness to replace the term service charge with an alternative terminology to avoid any sort of confusion for consumers. Now, a petition is being heard against a July 4th, 2022 guideline issued by Central Consumer Protection Authority order barring restaurants from automatically adding service charge to food bills for people who come to eat at restaurants and other dining areas. The matter of service charge, remember, has been in contention for years now. We will, of course, try and figure out whether service charge is mandatory. What do you do if you have to or are asked to pay service charge? All of that and more. To answer those questions would be Arnav Pandey, who's joining us, who is also founder of Money Edu School. Arnav, thanks very much for taking time out. First question first, before we come to what's actually happening. Is service charge mandatory?
No, if you look at the very nature of what service charge is, one has to understand service charge is not a statutory levy. What this means is that this is not a legal requirement to pay. Service charge is what you pay for the happiness, or if you feel good about the service, then if you want to pay, you can pay a service charge for that particular service. Now see, distinguish this from a statutory levy, which is, say for example, a goods and service tax. Okay, a tax which is a GST is something which you have to pay. So if you eat in a restaurant and the GST is say 5%, you have to pay. But this service charge is like a tip which you give only if you are happy. So which is why you will find that already there have been instructions that since this is not an automatic or it is not a statutory levy, it should not seem to be made payable by the person who comes to eat as if that this is something which they have to pay. Because if you look at it, earlier what used to happen was that in the bill itself you got one item which had this term which had service charge. So for a person who didn't know about this, they would not know whether this is actually something which is like a tax, what is it, or how do they distinguish this from any other tax payment.
So Arnav, if I were to phrase the same question slightly differently, does it mean that charging service charge is illegal? Or would it be too hard a word to say that it is illegal? Legally, see, there's a difference between statutory requirements and rules. An organization or a restaurant or a hotel could have its own set of rules which are over and above whatever is the statutory requirement. So is it therefore illegal for restaurants to have the service charge in the bill?
No, so a restaurant can put a service charge in the bill, but you are not forced to pay it. So for example, if you are not happy about it, you might not want to pay. They cannot force you to pay. That is the difference. And if you look at it, even I think just a few days ago, the Department of the Ministry of Consumer Affairs has also highlighted this fact that the restaurants cannot force a person to pay a service charge because this is not something which they have to compulsorily pay. So that is the key difference here, that there might be an item in the bill, but if you are not happy about it, then you might choose not to pay it, or you might want to pay a lower amount. See, the problem with the service charge often is the amount of the service charge, because what most restaurants do when they apply this charge is that they apply it as a percentage of the bill. Okay, so it's not normally a flat figure. So if you have, say, a bill of 900 and the charge is 10%, the amount comes to 90, but if the bill goes to 2000, then the amount goes to 200. So which is what also makes a lot of people look up and see whether they actually have to pay the charge or not.
All right. On the latest that has come out of Delhi High Court, and that is your restaurant associations, two of them, have been directed to pay 1 lakh rupee for non-compliance. And non-compliance here, in case of Delhi High Court order, that you must furnish us a list, a comprehensive list of your partner restaurants that are not willing to either remove the word service charge, because to a lot of people, when you say service charge, it looks like it's mandatory. It looks like it's a part of the bill that you have to pay. And on top of that, furnish also a list of restaurants that continue to mandatorily charge a service charge, either 10% or 15%, depending on where you eat. What is happening in Delhi High Court? If you could break it down for us, what exactly is the petition about?
No, so what one has to understand is that there were specific guidelines given in order to solve this entire issue, because there were a lot of cases where there used to be fights between the restaurant and the customers about whether this charge has to be paid, whether it is to be compulsory and all. So the first thing is that to avoid all this kind of confusion, it was said that you need to either change the terminology here or remove that charge as a compulsory item. Now, what has been seen is that it's not that every restaurant has complied with this order or this requirement, and which is why you find that this specific direction has come from the court, whereby now the association has to give a list of entities which are not complying, and due to non-compliance till now, the fine has been levied.
So, Arnav, if one were to go to a restaurant, many of us do, and you open the menu card has got rates against every dish. And there are many menus which have this little disclaimer at the bottom that 10% service charge will be levied. Now, as a consumer, you are looking at that menu card and you're placing an order. After you've placed that order, and when the standard disclaimer is part of the menu card, then are you not legally obliged to pay that service charge? Because the restaurant can come back and tell you that, hey, this was part of the same menu card through which you ordered, and this was very clearly written. Or let's say, even if you happen to not read it, if the waiter comes and tells you that as a restaurant, he makes it amply clear that we charge 10% service charge, and if you don't contest it then can you actually contest it after the bill is presented to you?
So in a way, one is that if they tell you upfront and they say that this amount will be charged to you, that is one part of the thing. But
I'm saying basically it's the same rule versus law debate, that when you talk about rules which are added not in the realm of illegality, but rules that an organization sets, those are rules. Those may or may not be contested using law. You could have a rule of wearing a school uniform to school. You could have a rule of not wearing jeans to office. These are organizational rules, not necessarily rules or law as dictated by the constitution or by any bill. So I'm saying, as long as there's a communication to a customer that, hey, this is an invitation for you to come and eat at my restaurant, and this is what it's going to cost you. You have, when you're placing the order, you've pretty much complied with those terms and conditions, haven't you?
And just to add to that, it's you who's choosing to enter that establishment. The establishment is not forcing you to enter. So this is what restaurants continue to say, that we have put it out there on the menu card. We've displayed it even outside of the restaurant, but you chose to enter, therefore comply with what we ask you to do or how much we ask you to pay.
No, so in a way, when you have been told upfront, when you agree to that, and then you take service, then if the charge is levied, ideally you should be ready to pay it. But still, the charge, even though they say it's a specific 10%, if you find that there is sufficiency of service, then you can say that, see, it's okay, the charge is there, but maybe I don't want to pay it because the service was bad. So the point here is that you cannot be forced to pay it, even though if that is there, because if you have a valid reason for not doing so, then you can say that I don't want to pay it. Even though I mean, you cannot use that argument that I didn't know about it. Because if it is made very clear upfront that this is what will be charged for the service, or you've been told about it, or it's there on the menu, then you cannot use that argument that I didn't know about it.
Right.
But if there is a deficiency in service, then you can choose to say that I don't want to pay this, or maybe I want to pay less.
Deficiency in service is again a very vague term. Who's
Very,
the arbiter on
yeah,
that?
I didn't like the taste of the food. I didn't like the salt that you put in the food. I didn't like the fact that it was too cold or too hot. My problem with all of this is, and I think it's a problem of every person who goes out there to eat, is that who defines deficiency in service? Who defines whether a service is a good service or a bad service? Usually customer is the king, but then off late there have been videos circulating, Karthik, of brawls, fights between hotel and restaurant management and people for refusing to pay up service charge. So from what I'm hearing, Arnav, I'm still not clear. If I agree, or if it's written on the menu, if it's written out there very prominently that this restaurant will ask you to pay service charge and I don't like the service they offer, or even if I like the service they offer but I don't want to pay service charge, what happens thereafter?
So ideally, I mean, if it is written, you have agreed to that, then you have to pay it. But again, this is not a very clear-cut thing in the sense that the guidelines say very clearly you cannot force someone to pay this.
Okay.
So, I mean, in that sense, if a person says that, see, point A here is that you have to differentiate something. Like, it's not like that you consume the food and then you didn't like it, so you say, I will not pay for the food. You are paying for the food. This is an extra charge for the service which you get there. And by its very nature, it is like a gratuity. Gratuity meaning that you are happy about it, so you are paying it. Now, the question could be out as to what is the amount which has to be paid. But since if you are not happy about it, then obviously you have the right to not pay. And even the ministry has made it very clear that it has told the Association of Hotel Owners that at least the restaurant should not force a person to pay this if they don't want.
So, as a consumer, do you have the right to say no to service charge, irrespective of how you define deficiency and liking or disliking something? As a customer, do I have the right to refuse service charge? Number one, or as a rule, is the restaurant legally, compliant by forcing me to pay it? What is the final legal stand on it, Arnab?
So you are not forced to pay the service charge. Now, then the restaurant might say that if you don't pay it, then we might not serve you. And then that would give rise to another conflict. But ideally, they cannot force you to pay the charge. I mean, that much is clear. But the problem usually happens because, see, I mean, these small things, when you try and actually implement it, it's not very clear in terms of implementation, and it's not like that you can cite some saying that, say, the ministry has said this, so I will not pay it, which is where all the fight starts.
So, Arnav, why not just make it illegal? Why shouldn't we just make it illegal for restaurants or service providers to charge a service charge? Should it just be made illegal? Then no rule can come in the way, right?
No, so I mean, see, making it illegal would mean that, say, all the people who are working there would not be able to get the benefit of any such gratuity which the customer might want to.
But that's fine. The restaurant in its power can increase the prices of every dish on the menu and make that gratuity indirectly to its employees.
I mean, they can obviously do it. I mean, if many of them are already doing it, there's no way of knowing that this is there.
Okay.
Because, I mean, it's not like that you are going to say the paneer butter masala here is X amount, it's in another restaurant, it's there, so I am not going here because I think they will put a charge on it.
Okay.
So, I mean, restaurants have their ways of going about the entire system.
All right. But as much as I think I would like to get more clarity, we're running out of time. Thanks very much for joining us with your inputs on that very important story. We're still not sure whether to pay or not pay, but remember, restaurants cannot force you. I think that's the last word.